Hello everyone, thank you for tuning in. Again, I am Kaylee Batesman, the Content Director at She Can Code, and today we are asking, are women over-mentored and under-sponsored, and why we need a balance of both? Both mentorship and sponsorship can be valuable in different ways, complementing each other for a well-rounded professional development experience. But what if you're being over-mentored and under-sponsored as a woman in tech? Now, I've got three amazing guests from Capco with me today who are all principal consultants at Capco. I've got Winter Baker, Emma Kudal, and Varenya Prasad, all from Capco, and all here to share their own experiences of both mentorship and sponsorship and why it's important to have a good balance throughout your career. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Great speaking to you.
Good.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you for taking the time out to have a chat with She Can Code today. We're going to get started with a bit of background to set the scene about each of you. So can we start with Emma? Let's start with yourself, please.
Yeah, so I am a principal consultant in Capco's data practice in the UK, so based in London. And I've spent the last few years kind of working with clients across data and technology spaces, kind of helping them design and implement data strategies and data management frameworks. There's a little bit about myself. I kind of started off my career in financial services, but more in that kind of investment banking space. So after doing my degree in economics, I kind of moved into middle office and back office functions of investment banks. And it was actually through working with some Capco teams in those banks that I kind of found out a bit more about consultancy. So I moved into Capco, not originally working data and tech, purely kind of business consulting. It was actually about 7 years ago that I started on a data management office project setting up for a kind of a global bank that I got involved in. Pretty much not really looked back since. I've redefined myself kind of a female lead in the data strategy and advisory space, and help clients with a range of projects across kind of data lineage controls, data quality frameworks, setting up TOMs, data governance and policy.
Amazing. It sounds like you have a very busy day, Emma. We're going to go into that in a little bit more in a second. Winter, yourself.
Hello, I am a feminine leaning genderqueer individual. I use they, them pronouns. And pretty much throughout my childhood, I was a little bit too smart for my own good. I read everything and instantly decided that is what I wanted to do with my life. Until one summer, my last year of high school, I got really bored. My brother had just moved out. He enlisted in the Army. And my dad had just wrapped up his master's program in software development. And bored with nothing to do that summer, I picked up application-based object-oriented programming for a modern interface with Visual Basic 2000.
Yeah,
as you do. And it's the first time I ever really heard of the concept of coding and software development. And frankly, it was love at first sight. I immediately pivoted my life goals there, started looking for a university that had really high computer science programs, got my bachelor's degree, and been doing this ever since. Into consulting, I actually initially landed in consulting under some DoD U.S. Department of Defense subcontractors. So that's kind of a pseudo consultancy. And I kind of liked the model, and I've just been in consulting for software development ever since.
Amazing. It's something that we'd love to hear on here, all of your different stories and all of the different ways that people make it into tech. So we love that. Varenya, yourself, have you read that book?
Actually, as I was hearing both Emma and Winter speak, there's a lot of commonality I could find from both of them in terms of their own experiences. So I actually got into tech in, I'd say, school itself, like high school. So developing and programming. So starting then, I do have, again, a bachelor's and a master's in software or computer science, and then like specialization in database management. So Emma and I actually worked in the same gig like a few years ago now at this point. But basically, I think my route into consulting was sort of by fluke. So the quintessential software development path where, you always imagine yourself being a software developer doing one of the bank processes. That was my initial understanding of what, being in tech meant. And then through consulting, I've sort of understood that that's not just the only way to be, participating in this space. And that's not the only role that is available for people to play. And so again, for myself, data was always something that I played around with before. And then through consulting was able to figure out what about it made sense to me and what parts of it I wanted to play with. So that's been a good journey so far, at least that way in terms of what technology is meant for me.
Amazing. And you started quite a traditional computer science background at school. What was that like at school for you? Was it one of those stories where you was only yourself and maybe one other girl in the class, or what was that like?
Yeah, it was myself and two other girls in the class. I was the only major, while the other girl, thankfully, she was there. She was a minor. Yeah, so it was very, very, male-dominated industry for sure. The classrooms are always, I was always the sort of the odd child out, no matter what I did.
Yeah. Luckily, females are making it through to the tech industry, though. So we hear that often, though, that you're normally outnumbered on computer science courses.
Definitely.
Yeah.
There was a change, I think, in terms of even those numbers sort of started to change from undergrad to grad, but still the majority was still a heavily male-dominated classroom.
Yeah. We have lots to talk about today, and we're going to talk a little bit about sponsorship and mentorship. So we're going to kick off with just kind of the difference between sponsorship and mentorship for any of our listeners who are tuning in and thinking, what on earth is the difference between the two anyway? Emma, can we kick off with you? Can you maybe give us a brief definition of, what is the difference between sponsorship and mentorship?
So I suppose my kind of view on this is, a mentor that is someone that provides guidance and advice, someone that you get to, have a key impact on your career, but through providing good insights and helping you navigate maybe difficult situations or challenges that you have in your career. Whereas I think a sponsor is very much someone who potentially is more senior to you, but someone that can really advocate for you and actually not just help guide and steer you through opportunities, but help actually create those opportunities for you in your career.
Yes, and sometimes just being that voice in the room, you don't even need to be present for a sponsor, just to kind of advocate for you when you're not in that room is super helpful. Winter, is that kind of your experience of sponsorship and mentorship?
Yeah, I would mostly agree. I think I worded it a little differently. Kind of based on skill sets, I kind of imagine a mentor as being someone who is there to help you close the gaps and learn where you can be doing better, where you can pick up more skills. Whereas a sponsor is there to push the envelope on what you already excel at.
Yes, that is a good definition, actually, between the two. I think people, that's why we wanted to start off with it on this podcast. People do get confused between the two, and I think they think that sometimes they can be the same thing, but they are absolutely different, and different people that you need to try and find as part of your career. Verenia, yourself, would you agree?
Oh, yeah, definitely with both of them. The part about advocacy was sort of interesting to me because I agree that a sponsor is definitely someone that steps in for you when you're not in the room. And I agree that there is a component of sort of that seniority and the mentorship that comes from being, the role that they play as a sponsor. But I've also found that, at least in, the industry that we work in, the seniority of it helps in terms of pushing for end goals. But advocacy, or people, advocating for you, can come essentially from any level. It's just the, sort of the power and the force behind it and how far it goes.
Yeah, and on that note, Verenia, I wanted to ask all of you a little bit about the main benefits of both sponsors and mentors, because you just mentioned there, Verenia, about advocacy, which is so important because the main benefits of sponsors and mentors are hugely different, because a sponsor could dip in every now and then and advocate for you, whereas a mentor, is more of an ongoing relationship where you kind of, meet, whether it's for coffee or, some time to share advice, isn't it? Do you think that there are different, main benefits to each of them, and both equally important?
Yeah, at least for myself, I'd say I found mentors to, like, the mentorship relationship to be a little less formal. So I'm able to sort of tap into their mindset, or their advice as and when needed. Obviously, there is a decorum that you need to follow, but for the most part, I found that people are very willing to, help you walk through whatever you're trying to resolve at the moment. With the sponsor, again, perhaps because of the seniority that they, the role that they are in, I'm a little bit more cautious about reaching out to them how often I reach out to them, right? And maybe it's one of those things where I reach out to a sponsor specifically when I'm looking for their specific view on what I'm trying, or like the issue that I'm going for at that moment. So that way, I'd say there is a difference in the way I interact with them, but that also, I think, depends on the kind of sponsor or mentor that you find. I do know, like, I have been fortunate enough to have a sponsor that, sort of plays both the mentorship and the sponsor role. But that's because they are just inherently vested in a day-to-day basis in my development.
Yeah, that's quite lucky to find both in one person.
Extremely fortunate, yeah.
Winter, would you agree on what Verena was saying? That she was saying about the way that you interact with those people is so different, because a mentor can be less formal, and for some people that would just, that's sometimes a better relationship for you. If it's less formal, that person is, not as senior, then surely you're more comfortable, and you might take more from it. If the way that you interact with that person is very different.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I find, maybe this is from being significantly more on the digital side of things myself, I find, oddly enough, most times my most powerful sponsors have been our clients. I get kind of more from the client's leadership than from like leadership within my own team structure. Because when you're in consulting, it's client is the ultimate person you're trying to work for, you're trying to make happy. So when they're happy, everyone's happy.
Yes.
So definitely, it's a very different relationship with a client than it is within your own team.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought of that, because you're right. A sponsor can be internal or external, and I've heard that as well with mentors, because people seem to think, oh, I'll go looking for a mentor within my own company, and actually it's sometimes beneficial to have mentors in all areas of your career, because somebody internally might give you different advice than somebody that was externally. And I hadn't even thought about that with sponsors. That it being a client. Emma, yourself, do you have any sponsors that are clients, or that's quite an interesting one?
I think most of my sponsors probably be more internal, but it's still incredibly important to build that relationship with your clients where they are able to provide that feedback. You are able to really demonstrate your business value for the client and have that recognized. And I think when it is recognized and when you are advocated through that route, it can also have a really positive impact on probably how you're viewed internally as well. So really open up some of the doors that way too. And I think sponsorship can sometimes be that kind of almost like reciprocal relationship where it kind of almost works both ways. You get sponsored, but also you have to be able to kind of provide that value back to your sponsor to get them invested and advocate for you. Whereas mentorship could be that bit more less formal and maybe someone you kind of like trust or a bit more invested in.
Yes, I agree in that. Finding someone within your company sometimes can be easier, especially if there's a mentor program and you can join up, and some companies do like matchmaking of mentors. Sometimes sponsors can be harder to find. That's something that you almost, as you said, it's more of an investment. You have to almost work throughout your career as well to gain the trust of somebody. And like you said, it works both ways. They advocate for you, you might advocate back at some point. But I suppose as well on that note, Emma, is that I wanted to ask you, why do you think women are over mentored and under sponsored? Do you think perhaps that's one of the reasons that, you know, a lot of companies make it easier to have a mentoring program, but sponsors might be quite hard to find, especially somebody's very senior. That's can be quite hard to find.
Yeah, definitely. And I've actually been working as kind of the lead for the D&I team within the data practice in the UK for the last kind of 12 months. And I think that's something that we're really trying to focus on as well, as how do we support kind of women to move through the mid-levels into the leadership positions. And one of the things that have been set up with kind of the Women at Capco Network is a mentorship scheme for women at that kind of level. But it is also recognizing, yes, we need to be able to help provide them with that mentorship, that guidance, that support in how to probably advocate for themselves in the career and progress. But we also need that sponsorship and support from kind of the leadership team to help provide those opportunities and create space for these women to be able to progress in that way and actually leverage what they're able to get from their mentoring relationships.
Yes, I love it. Yeah. And I hear that often as well, that everything trickles down from the top and everything needs to trickle down from leadership. So yes, if a company is, you know, creating a culture of you know, where women feel like they can be supported, that has to come from the top through sponsorship as well. It's not kind of a oh, we're just on here. We have the expression, somebody told me once, start a Slack channel and it solves everybody's problems. You know, you can't just start a Slack channel about supporting women in technology and expect all of your problems to be solved. The same with mentorship. You kind of can't solve that problem with just mentorship. You have to have sponsorship from your leadership team as well. So it's quite a challenge for some companies. Winter, what about yourself? Why do you think women are over mentored and under sponsored?
So, this is actually the question I think I might have overthought. And I did really dig into this because it ends up hitting along one of my backgrounds in communication. I did some studying on linguistic anthropology, and at least in the US, especially where we still have a lot of kind of like culturally coded language patterns. One of the things that I have found working in my professional career in the States has been that there's kind of this cultural communication barrier between the typically feminine coded professionals and masculine coded professionals, where kind of just the nuances of in traditionally feminine communication styles are seen as being trepidatious or unassured of their own skill sets, and typically viewed from the flip side of the coin, you know, they're not as self-assured or confident in their own abilities.
Yeah.
So it's kind of that almost social stigma that I feel is working against us.
Yes, I've heard that often. You are absolutely correct. I think we do hear that often, that ladies perhaps are not self-assured, or I've heard on this podcast often how many times we've heard about women that don't apply for a job because they don't think they tick all the boxes, or they need somebody to encourage them to go for the role, a manager or a sponsor or a mentor that encourages them to go for that position. So you're absolutely right. I think sometimes that does work against us, and perhaps that's why women do end up being over mentored and under sponsored, because that's what we assume. Verenya, would you agree with that as to why women are over mentored and under sponsored sometimes?
Yeah, completely. I think just generally mentorship is easier to find than sponsorship. But then on top of that, I think perhaps the way women approach that, or approach just being in the workplace, is different than how men would or do. And then I think it's culturally viewed, or the way men approach it with the confidence and the attitude they bring to it is always just treated as the better way to do it. And so I think women then it becomes a cycle where they step back further.
Yes, I completely agree. And you just said there, you know, mentors can be easier to find. Can I ask each of you a little bit about your own experiences? And you know, have you found mentors easier to find? And have you ever had a sponsor? Verenya, I know you said you've got that all rolled into one person. What were your experiences before finding that that gem of a person?
I think in my personal experience, when I said mentors are easier to find than sponsors, I think first off, both are hard to find. People that you can trust and rely on, whose experience that you can sort of blindly take in some ways is hard to find, right? So you do have to sort of find the right person to fit into those roles as well. But having said that, I think generally it's easier for people to talk through their experiences, what worked, what didn't work, and then I think lending I guess a listening ear is easier, and most people would be more than happy to do that because they themselves have probably received it in the past, or they have children and understand, what it means for them. I think the delineation and sort of translating that person into a sponsor, that I think goes back to what Emma was saying before, is it is a reciprocal relationship. Especially if they're in a senior position, for them to advocate for you, they need to actually believe in you as well. They need to see that you will step in to do what's needed and do it in a way that, makes sense to them, helps their life as well. So in some ways, it is a reciprocal relationship that you have to sort of build with them.
Yes, you're right, because a mentor role, a lot of people might feel quite comfortable stepping into a mentor role, and as you said, offering advice, actually advocating for somebody and their skills. That's quite a different role to take on as a sponsor, rather than a mentor. I agree there. Emma, yourself, what has your experience been like in finding mentors and sponsors?
Yeah, I think when I was probably more junior levels, the sponsorship probably came from more direct managers, people who did want to, see you progress in your career. You're doing well. You kind of deserve to have those right opportunities. Whereas I think as I've kind of developed in my career, it's been a bit more, I've had to be more conscious about trying to find people to sponsor and have those kind of quite direct conversations about what I'm looking for and what I can kind of bring in terms of value and what I need back. And I think that's definitely, as I've grown and felt more confident to be able to do that, probably widened the scope of who I can speak to about being a sponsor. Whereas, from a mentorship perspective, it definitely has been just people that I've worked well with or kind of admired, or being able to build quite a good working relationship with, that then have kind of developed into more that kind of guidance and support role.
Yes, and you saying that growing throughout your career, I suppose as well, what you require in a mentor and a sponsor when you're quite early in your career is very different as you grow anyway. And also, as we picked up on here, as well, having the confidence to ask somebody when you're very early on in your career, when you could probably really do with a mentor as well, you don't have that confidence to reach out to somebody and say, hey, would you be my mentor, or could you advocate for me? You don't have that early on in your career, do you? You have to wait a few jobs to even have the confidence, really,
or even to understand the importance of it and actually what value it can bring and how much it can help you.
Yes.
What to ask for.
Sorry, Brenda?
And also just what to ask for, because as you're growing, you don't really know what you need to.
Exactly. You're just grateful that you got a job at that point. You're just graduating. God, I got a job. Let alone knowing where you want to go next or who to ask to how to progress in your career. Yes, I definitely agree. Winter, what has been your own experience with finding mentors and sponsors?
So I agree that mentors are definitely easier to come by. I feel like I've taken mentorship from, I would think, most people that I've worked with to some degree. At least when you're in the more technical digital space, I feel like there's always something you can learn from everybody you work with. And so that's always really nice to be able to be part of that kind of culture where everyone is teaching everyone. As for sponsors, I would say I've probably actually only had one sponsor in my professional career. And one of the things that I've kind of noticed and made note is, like, all of the people that I might have thought have been my sponsor at one point, that really necessarily weren't at the end of the day. All ended up being my male professional leaders. And the one sponsor I do have is the female professional leader out of my office. And, yeah, there's the gender discrepancy there, but it really highlighted for me one thing, which is you're only going to have an effective sponsor if you both want the same thing.
Yes.
If your professional targets are different, then you're not going to see the value in each other.
Yes, definitely. And finding somebody that you align with on that can be quite a challenge, obviously. As you said, it can be more challenging to find a sponsor than a mentor.
Yes.
I love the fact that you said just taking something from everybody that you work with as well. And just having that mindset, I suppose, and being in that learning mindset, which, as we mentioned, when you go into your first job, you're not thinking that way. You're not sure what to ask from a mentor, and you're probably not thinking, I need to take everything I can from the people that I learn from. It's just being thrown into the world of work can be quite frightening anyway. We've spoken a little bit about the differences between the two, but how can people go about getting a sponsor or a mentor? We've mentioned, about people that you work with, line managers. Should you approach mentors and sponsors differently? And is it just as easy as shooting somebody a message on LinkedIn, for instance? Emma, what do you think? How can people go about that topic? I take it you just don't go up to somebody at a networking event after one drink and say, will you be my mentor?
No, but I do think that actually those sort of kind of networking events can open other doors and avenues to expanding your network and meeting some inspirational people that you think might actually be really good people to become your mentors, or maybe eventually your sponsor. So as you said, I think it definitely can be within your own work environment, might be direct team, it might be one of your clients, but it could be someone that you have met through a networking event as well. And I think, mentor relationships can probably develop maybe a little bit more naturally. It could be just touching base, going for a coffee, having a Zoom chat, and then seeing how that kind of develops from there. Whereas, I think from a sponsorship perspective, it is probably identifying someone that, as you said, does have similar kind of goals and targets or values as yourself, similar kind of career alignment or objectives, that you're able to both kind of bring some value to that partnership. And I think that probably can be quite a bit more challenging. I think I've been in positions before where I thought someone was being my sponsor, and then probably transpired that maybe it wasn't, maybe needed to be more kind of formalized, or we do actually have more of a direct conversation about it, whereas I do feel like that's not always necessary or required when it comes to a mentor.
Yes, or even with a mentor, it can be easier, I think, because you hear of mentor programs, it can be easier to match make with people, whether that's in your company or externally. But with a sponsor, it's kind of, I had a lady on here who said to me, it's that voice who advocates for you when you're not in the room. So, which is a lovely way of putting it. They're there when you're not in the room. So asking somebody to be your sponsor up front can be quite strange. Like, hey, do you just like throw in my name when I'm not in that meeting? It's kind of strange to say. So yeah, it's more built on a relationship, and whether that person trusts you, you're working towards the same goals, obviously. Whereas mentorship can be informal in that way of, hey, do you want to grab a coffee? And then that kind of turns into a monthly coffee, or whatever that may be. So yeah, mentors tend to be easier to find. Verena, yourself, how do you think people can go about getting a sponsor and or a mentor?
I think the suggestion you had in terms of reaching out to people and being at networking events, etc., to find you can find mentors that way, and you can have conversations and informal chats with them. That I think makes sense to me from a just exploring your own horizons, right? Like in terms of what is available or not, and there may be things that you come across as a result of speaking to people. In my personal experience, I found that mentorship perhaps can be approached that way, but sponsorship, at least for me personally, has come in slowly. It hasn't been something that I've been able to, reach out to someone, necessarily say, hey, what about, like, do you feel, could you do this for me? It's usually come in a little bit more slowly, because it's usually been it's been at a point where I've had interactions over months or years, etc. And then I'm in a position to be able to get that or have that sort of conversation with them, because by then you've built that symbiotic relationship where they know what you need, and you have the courage, the discipline, and the determination to ask, and you know what you want to ask for as well. So I think I found, at least personally, that getting to that point takes a little bit of time.
Yes, it's definitely a slow burner, finding a sponsor. And I find as well, people put on their CVs, they mentor people, they mentor young people, for instance, within their company. You don't tend to see people saying, I sponsor so and so, or I go out my way to try and advocate for young people. And it's not really something people tend to say, but they will put on their CV, I have mentored young people. I have several mentees, for instance. So yeah, you're definitely right. They should be approached differently when trying to find both, but both are obviously equally important. Winter, yourself, how do you think people can go about finding a sponsor and a mentor?
So I think everything that's already been said about finding a mentor is spot on. It really is kind of the quote unquote easier, and I feel like it's something you can actually go and pursue if you take the time and the effort. But in my experience, what I found is that sponsors tend to come to you. And that is kind of the difficult part, is to be able to actually get a sponsor and to do it effectively. The best thing that I feel like you can do that's inside your control is just to be open about who you are. I kind of phrase it as this is what I have done, this is why I think it's important, and this is where I want to take it. And if you're super open about that and always talking about it, then the person who agrees with you is going to come to you.
Yes. I love that. They do come to you. And I think as well, knowing that as well, as you climb through the leadership ranks as well, I suppose it's something to remember when you look back as well and think, I wish I had a sponsor and somebody had come to me and advocated for me when I was more junior in my career. And so hopefully, as more people go through their careers, they remember to look back and think, I can be a sponsor for somebody. And if I do align with somebody on certain business goals, I need to go and approach somebody. And you're all right, the sponsor does come to you after you've obviously made that connection.
I think that's why actually it's I think that's why having conversations like this is so important as well, because it's really bringing visibility to that and allowing people to recognize how can they actually be a mentor, how can they be a sponsor for other people. And I think
have they ever thought about that?
Yeah, exactly. And what opportunities do they have in their own role, at whatever level they're at, to be able to have that impact for someone else's career as well.
Yes, because it's great. It's great for both people, especially mentorship. If you want to add that to your CV, or you want to add that that is something that you do that is extra, then I've had conversations on here from people that are part of they are mentors, and I've had mentees, and the benefits that both bring anyway, because you learn from both of those experiences as well. So you're right, Emma. Just think sometimes just taking a step back and thinking, can I be a mentor to somebody, or could I possibly be a sponsor to someone? Is perhaps something that not everybody has thought about throughout their careers. So yeah, hopefully, you never know, this conversation might spark some inspiration in people. And I wanted to ask you all a little bit about, do you think having a sponsor increases your visibility at work? Verenia, can we start with you on that? Obviously, it is super important to be visible at work. Do you think having a sponsor really helps with that?
Yeah, for sure, incredibly. I think that advocacy that comes in from behind closed doors when you're not part of the room, that's basically someone representing you when they don't have to. I think that speaks so highly of, what kind of qualities and skills that you can bring to the table. If someone can do that when they're not under the gun, that really helps you showcase what level of skill and ability you bring to the table, for sure. I think also going back to what we were just talking about in terms of having those mentorship conversations. The other aspect of it is that I don't know when the switch clicks in terms of becoming a sponsor. So it's also one of those things that you continue those conversations, and it doesn't. At some point, I think you do need to have that thought about what you want to drive out of it, but also just maintaining what you've built. Because I think that's the hard part, where I've definitely had experiences where I've built mentorship relationships and not necessarily invested as much as I would like to. And therefore perhaps lost, someone that would have been a sponsor otherwise too.
Yes, I love the fact that you just said the when the switch is flicked, and you are right. You kind of, it's almost for a sponsor sometimes isn't something that is formally discussed either. It's just kind of, the switch is flicked and somebody is a sponsor for you. So yeah, I think approaching both very differently, both are very different and both need to be approached differently. Winter, yourself, do you think having a sponsor increases your visibility at work?
It absolutely does. And the importance is, there aren't enough words to really emphasize how important it is. And, I do want to be fair and caveat this with my own personal experience of having only worked in the States, and I've only worked in consulting. But I found without a sponsor, it is practically impossible to actually move through your company professionally, and to actually get to your professional targets.
Yes, definitely. And I think that depends on the company as well, doesn't it? I mean, I suppose if you're at a startup, there are less people, so you tend to have more contact with your leadership team, for instance, rather than a big company. Kind of depends, doesn't it, whether or not your leadership team are accessible as well.
It depends. So, in consulting, I've worked at, large global corporations like Capco, but I first started at a small software shop of 60 people. And even there, I found kind of the same thing of, without having that sponsor there, nobody really pays you any attention.
Yes. So important to find one to have that visibility. And Emma, yourself, have you felt the same way with a sponsor can really help you to be visible at work?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's partly being more visible. I think there are obviously ways that you can make yourself visible and put yourself in those positions, but I think it's also being recognized by kind of the leadership team for the work that you're doing, for the value that you're adding, and being able to build up that kind of that reputation or that brand. I think without someone to support, advocate that, and even if it's more of kind of, an agreement with someone else's perception, but having those voices in the room to be able to provide that backing for you, I think that's invaluable. I don't think without that sort of sponsorship or recognition, that you can progress in the same way.
Yes, and without always, I mean, it is important to advocate for yourself always, but it's having that extra person, having somebody else to do it, instead of you always feeling like you have to be the voice of, I'm doing this and this was a great project because I was on it. It comes off as arrogance. Having a sponsor that can advocate for you when you're not in the room obviously will really improve your visibility within the company, and just let the leadership team know that you are on the map and doing great things throughout the company, regardless of the company size as well. As you were saying, Winter, it can be the same whether you're a big company or a small company. We are almost out of time, everybody. So I wanted to ask you one final question. Do you have any final advice for our listeners who are thinking about either getting a mentor or a sponsor, or are perhaps already doing that themselves or are considering becoming one themselves? Verenia, should we start with you?
I think this will vary depending on where you are in your career. I'd say, especially if you're starting new, invest in yourself to take the time to have that informal coffee or lunch with seniors of your team in your firm. It might be a little bit intimidating to start off, but ultimately, I think that's the starting point, where you're signaling that you're looking for guidance and advice, and it'll open up your eyes in terms of, just what are the sort of roles, opportunities that are available to you, what are sort of topics you should be looking at, and start from there. I think whether or not you get a mentor out of it or a sponsor out of it, you'll learn something out of it. You'll build a relationship there, and that will, if you start putting in the work, it'll slowly lead to you finding those mentors and sponsors.
Yes, and even as you said, they're just making the time to have a coffee or making the time to reach out to leadership and saying, hey, can we have a discussion about something? I think that really shows them that you're very invested in that company. You're not that person that is thinking, oh, I'll just jump around from company to company. If you're reaching out and asking for help, then it sounds like you are heavily invested in the company's goal and what they want to do, and you want to know more. Surely that can only work in your favor.
Yeah, and I think that sort of proactive approach also lets them know what you're looking for in terms of the next role that you want to do, right? So that helps then in terms of the kind of advice you receive, but also if they start to think about sponsoring you, they know what to sponsor you for as well.
Yes, because they're not mind readers. Is the other thing that they could sponsor you in a completely different direction, and you think that's not what I wanted to do. Actually, you're pushing me in the wrong direction. So you're right. Even just having an open conversation with the leadership team about what you want to do next. At least they know whether or not they're going in the right direction. That is great advice. Winter, yourself, any final advice for our listeners?
Yeah, so I would say for mentorship, the biggest thing is allow yourself to make mistakes. That is, I say this especially to newer people coming in, and especially newer people coming into technical fields like software, like even financial domain technologies. There's kind of this, really expectation to get it right the first time and to do the best you can, and you're worried about making that good impression. But generally, you're going to find humans are really quite helpful. They really want to see everyone do well together. So if you allow yourself to make visible mistakes and not try to hide them or solve them on your own, you're going to get the help that you need, and that's going to grow into a mentorship, and that's going to be someone you can learn from and do better with.
Yes, just being honest about yourself, and I love that.
For sponsorship, this is almost a non-advice because it's just so difficult, and it's something I'm still even trying to learn today. But the most powerful tool you will ever have is learn how to manage up. It's the hardest thing you will ever have to learn how to do, and it's the most valuable.
Yes, I love that advice, because it's something that we don't think of day to day, and I think it is one of those things once you move throughout your career, that it starts to dawn on you, you do need to think about managing up, as you say. That is great advice. Emma, yourself, any final advice for our listeners?
Well, I think Verenia and Winter have touched on some really good points there. But I think kind of to echo Verenia, it's as well as making the time to start building those relationships, take time to kind of reflect on your own career and how things are going and what you're looking for, what maybe you're enjoying, what maybe you're missing, and what you need more support on. I think it's very easy, especially in our career in consulting, to get very just into all your delivery work, your client priorities, and trying to deliver for everyone else. But I think it's really important to make sure you're taking time to reflect on your own career growth, and looking for that support that you need to help grow that, and to see how those kind of mentor and sponsor relationships can support you. So I think I've seen a lot of people doing really well, but not necessarily making the most of the kind of opportunities that they are, and kind of stunting their growth and progression a bit there.
Yes, I think as well that being in the right company can really help with that. Some companies are really good at encouraging you to think outside of your day job, and thinking, take some time just to think about what you would like to do, and how you would like to progress outside of, as you said, all of those daily things that you do, and you just get wrapped up in client work. You reach the end of the year and you think, maybe I haven't really moved forward. I know I did a lot, but maybe I didn't move forward very much in my career. So yeah, that's great advice, to just remember to take the time to think, what would I like next, whether that's finding a mentor or a sponsor or becoming one yourself, whatever it may be. That is a lovely note to end it on, because we are already out of time, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been so interesting to hear about the differences between sponsorship and mentorship, and how women are over-mentored and under-sponsored. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining me.
Thank you.
And to all of our listeners, thank you so much for listening in, as always. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you again next time.